We'll start with the root chakra. The principle of this chakra is grounding. Now this doesn't need any explaining. You cut a nation away from its roots, the very foundations of what that nation was built on, the principles and culture upon which that nation was founded, then from the point of view of the subverter, the most important task is already achieved. As Karl Marx said, if you cut the people off from their history, then they can be easily persuaded. The importance of a grounded nation simply cannot be overstated. When people are taught that their ancestors were nothing more than a bunch of colonial, imperialist supremacists, as if that's all there is to it, it's a recipe for disaster and subjugation. Social Darwinism, and in contrast, reliance on big government, are likely to be the result of a people who are cut off from their own heritage, those being the extreme yin and yang of the root chakra. The extreme yang, in this case, leading not only to said social Darwinism, but widespread acceptance of mediocrity, and a deadly undercurrent of resentment. Resentment not only for those who seek to improve themselves, but for ancestral traditions. So any atavistic resurgence will be met with hostility. Any exaltation of traditional values or an attempt to better oneself will be looked upon as lofty or self-righteous. A very slavish, pedestrian existence, where mockers and scoffers revel in nihilism and tearing things down, without ever having the balls to build something themselves, or stand out in any meaningful way. So the prevailing attitude will be something akin to, you are a cog in the machine, so shut up and turn. And when the cogs need oiling, lest they grow stiff, throw in some alcohol. Because there will be no real appreciation for culture and what the ancestors have built, cultural relativism is inevitable. As people will place no value in the sacrifices that were made to build civilization, overindulgence and excessive consumerism will be the order of the day, and cynicism will be the default mentality. As for the extreme yin, simply put, welfare dependence and a surplus of unplanned pregnancy. Not a lot more really needs to be said that I haven't already touched on as far as that subject goes. The grounding of a nation is absolutely paramount to its survival. The next stage is the navel chakra. This chakra relates to sexuality, the principle being temperance, which is to say self-control and moderation. It's very simple. When you make everything about sex, you keep the people at a base level of consciousness, driven by their urges and overly concerned with their sexuality, so they're easy to subvert and control. It's a pure tactic of psychological warfare. It doesn't take a genius to see that this is currently what is happening. Now the next chakra is the solar plexus. The principle being integrity. This chakra is all about identity. The subverters are of course vehemently attacking the identity of nations. A nation's identity is its people. First they demonise the identity, then they will claim that there is no identity. Then they will claim that your country was built by immigrants and has always been a nation of immigrants. And if you say otherwise, they'll call you a racist. As I said, a nation's identity is its people. So they all go about undermining that with mass immigration and change the ethnic, cultural and political makeup of the nation. A healthy nation is one that is grounded in principles. The subverters, having already destroyed that and over-sexualised the people, will have an easy ride sabotaging the integrity of the nation. Integrity means to be whole and undivided. The natural result of mass immigration is division. A nation with no integrity is no nation at all. Now I'll jump up to the crown chakra now, and I'll work my way down, as it should be remembered that an attack on sovereignty works by collapsing the active three chakras at the bottom and the passive three chakras at the top in on the heart chakra in the centre. And once this happens, well, you know the score. The crown chakra relates to divinity, connection to the spirit. You don't have to be a shaman to see how the subverters are destroying people on a spiritual level, promoting radical secularism, consumerism and the like. That being said, you could always become a New Ager, think positive and meditate as the world falls down around you. Maoist China had a similar policy, promoting consciousness-raising sessions. It's an excellent way to pacify a nation if you're a subverter. Now, an extreme yang imbalance manifests as a god complex, but it is a yin imbalance in this particular chakra which serves the purpose of undermining a nation. The projection of divinity onto others. The promotion of celebrity worship, used to distract the nation as it is destroyed from the inside out. Bread and circuses. Need I say more? The next chakra down being the third eye, which means discernment is the issue. Pattern recognition, or lack thereof, versus overactive/paranoid behaviour. People are taught to look for things in what can only be described as an obsessive, compulsive way. Racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, transphobia, misogyny. They're all told that behind every wall lurks an evil white racist, just waiting to jump out and hold you down. And those that can't see it, well, that's just because they're privileged. And if that doesn't freak you out, how about some terrorists? They will repeatedly beat the terrorist drum and tell you that there are terrorists everywhere just waiting to blow you all up. And if we start running out of terrorists, hey, why not just open the borders up and bring in some more? Life is boring without widespread panic, paranoia and fear. All of this is used to gradually erode your freedom with new laws to fight terror and protect you from hate crimes. The extreme yin of the third eye is lack of discernment. On a national scale, this is a natural result of the mainstream media's lies and distortions. It doesn't matter how many times the government lies, how many times the media lies, how many times the so-called experts get it wrong or lie. We are told that if we pick up on this fact, that we are tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorists or ignorant and backwards. The people are taught that they cannot trust their own discernment and must defer to the experts for correct assessments. Now this leads us to the next chakra down, the throat chakra. The inevitable result of lack of discernment leads to the extreme yin and yang imbalances of the throat chakra. Inflexibility and impressionability. I don't think I even need to explain how these two extreme poles of behaviour are used by the media on behalf of the state. The dogma of various political positions, state-approved identities, by which I mean certain stereotypical identities pushed by the media as good and trendy, all of which adhere to an identical set of politically correct viewpoints, character traits and mannerisms favourable to the state, but hostile to anything considered traditional. These types of people fall into both yin and yang extremes of the throat chakra. They are inflexible, but first they were impressionable. They were taught what to think instead of how to think. At that stage, they were impressionable. Through indoctrination, they became inflexible. In the end, that is usually what happens to most impressionable people. They flip from one extreme to the next, missing the truth as they pass it by. The media facilitate this by demonising and ridiculing those who legitimately know how to think. Now, what is the common denominator between these three passive chakras with regards to the nation? Well, the answer is the media. The crown is subverted by celebrity worship via the media. The third eye is subverted by talking heads, experts and news anchors who judge for you what you should judge for yourself, hijacking your discernment via the media. The throat chakra is subverted by redefining what is truth with prepackaged belief systems which literally render the real objective truth unacceptable via the media. These three chakras are, as I said, passive in nature, which means it is their job to receive. What are they supposed to receive? They are supposed to receive the Holy Spirit so that it may occupy the heart. What is the Holy Spirit? Well, the Holy Spirit is the medium between you and God, or the Creator, or whatever you want to call it. Medium being the key word. Now, the word media is the plural of medium. So the media's job is to replace the real medium and block your proverbial signal, so to speak. It all comes back round to maritime law. The news anchors, the anchor men and women, are called anchors because we are ships, aka maritime vessels, under maritime law. The purpose of an anchor is to moor a ship, that is, to keep it in one fixed position in order to prevent it from drifting off. So an anchor is to stop you, aka the vessel, from drifting off downstream. It is to, in the case of the media, keep you moored in the mainstream media. Now, the word main comes from Proto-Indo-European ma, which means power, but in its original sense was the phrase might and main, meaning the principal channel in a utility system. Well, a channel is a length of water connecting two seas. So again, we come back to water, maritime. This is why the mainstream media comes to us via TV channels. Don't change the channel, right? Because they want to keep you anchored, stationary. Station being another word for channel. Stationary in the mainstream. They don't want you floating off and connecting to the real medium, aka the Holy Spirit. So they keep you stable and they train you like an animal. Remember what Gary Newman said. Here in my car, I can only receive, I can listen to you, it keeps me stable for days in cars. Just as the vessel, aka the car, keeps your spirit stable in this world, and your spirit in turn keeps that vessel stable in spirituality because it is an insulator or an insulated medium, the mainstream media hijacks this role, standing in where the real medium should be, insulating or stabilizing your consciousness, keeping it anchored, tied down, in tune with the mainstream instead of the Holy Spirit. So instead of mind, body and spirit, you become mind, body and media. When a vessel is anchored by evil, meaning the Holy Spirit is not at the wheel, then it can easily be hijacked by pirates, by which I mean the unholy spirit, demons. The nation, in that same sense, can be hijacked by the Kenite subverters, the cultural Marxists, or whatever guise they may come in next. So the media supplants the medium in the top 3 passive chakras. So what about the bottom 3 chakras, the active chakras? Well, the active chakras are to give as opposed to receive. These 3 chakras pertain to the development of your identity, which is an act of giving because you build it from the ground up. You create your identity. Thus, you give the world your unique expression as an individual personality. You give and the world receives. So in a natural and healthy environment, it is your nation who receive the fruits of your tree, be they good or bad fruits. However, we are discussing the way in which these natural functions are subverted. In the same way that we discovered our passive function is subverted by mainstream media, meaning we receive from them as opposed to the real medium, which is the Holy Spirit, we must ask, to whom is our active function redirected? Who eats the fruits that we produce? The answer is the government. A corrupt government seeks to grow bigger. In order to grow, it must eat. So it grows bigger and bigger and bigger by eating the fruits that you provide. It is supposed to serve the people, but instead it has the people serving it. It controls and micromanages every aspect of the people's lives. Now, if we compare the fruits that we produce to gold, the government is like a goldsmith gone wrong, who becomes tyrannical and demands that he gets to shape that gold in an image that suits his purposes and not those of the people, even though the people produced that gold. The tyrannical government denies the people its roots and heritage, keeps them sexually overstimulated, thus easier to manage, and tells them that they're nothing but a nation of mongrels who have no identity outside that which the government defines. Alternatively, the tyrannical government may overemphasize the importance of roots and heritage, deny the people sexual freedom, and forbid them from mingling, so as not to allow any kind of outside influence whatsoever. But the current situation reflects the former rather than the latter. It's important to remember that the three lower chakras that we're currently examining are the animalistic or the beastly chakras. They represent our lower nature. Now, that's not to be interpreted in a negative way. It's just the yang to the top three's yin. Now, in order to make sure that our fruits do not benefit the people, the tyrannical government micromanage us to harvest those fruits. They cannot prevent us producing those fruits, so instead they manage us to assure that we do not blossom as a people by redirecting those fruits in their direction as opposed to the people's. By its very nature, the corrupt government cannot give, but only receive, centralising more and more. Due to this fact, it cannot create, so it simply guides and shapes what has already been created. That is what a manager is. The manager does not create and build a business. He or she manage, which just means to cope with and direct, the pre-existing circumstances. They manage that which already exists. Now, the word manage comes from the Italian manegere. It means to handle, but specifically to handle horses. So the government essentially handle us like horses and tame us for their own purposes, corresponding with our beastly or animalistic chakras. In truth, it is we who are supposed to manage ourselves, and any governmental structure that exists should be beholden to us. Unfortunately, this is currently not the case. The subverters are handling us like horses. And where do you keep horses? You keep horses in a stable. Just as the media anchor the passive chakras, the government stabilise the active chakras. If we were functioning as we should, meaning grounded in our roots and heritage as a nation, in control of our base desires, and united as a homogeneous people with a national identity, we would be stabilised by each other as a people, not government subverters who work on behalf of outside interests to destroy our peoples and nations and make one global monoculture. Now, I've shown that the higher passive chakras are equivalent to spirit because they receive the medium. So what do the lower beastly chakras correspond to? The answer is the mind. The healthy mind is nurtured and grounded in its culture and heritage, its familial and ancestral roots. It is in control of its base desires and emotions, governing them as opposed to being governed by them. And lastly, it is whole, as opposed to being divided and constantly at odds with itself in a state of perpetual cognitive dissonance. The identity naturally arises from this, nurtured by the previous contributing factors, but still ultimately its own creation, not merely a product of its environment, but more so a fingerprint from one finger. It has much in common with other fingers, but it's still its own print. The mind and the will of a nation is likewise individual from other nations. It may share certain similarities or traits, but ultimately it is its own expression, and governs itself. The globalist synagogue of Satan, unfortunately, seeks to change that, of course. Just as a mind with no integrity is governed by the environment around it, so too is the nation with no integrity, governed by outside usurpers and not its own will. A divided mind cannot make itself up. It doesn't have a will. A divided nation, likewise, cannot decide what it wants, and so its government will. Now that about covers the active chakras. So the passive chakras represent spirit. They are subverted by media. The active chakras represent mind. They are subverted by government. Now this only leaves the centre, the heart chakra, the equilibrium between the two, where they meet and become as one. The remaining designation being body, where mind and spirit unite. The active and the passive incorporate, which as you well know means form into a body. We're talking, however, of the corrupt government and mainstream media subverting the nation, when mind, spirit and body becomes government, media and body. Its macrocosmic national equivalent. People often say government literally means to govern the mind. Skeptics are quick to froth at the mouth and declare this wrong, as the meant in government comes from a different root word. But this really is a trivial point in the long run, because it's self-evident that governments do in fact try and control people's minds. So we can transcend context in regards to that, and say if the shoe fits, wear it. Now, we know that when the active and passive chakras are collapsed in on the heart, possession can occur. This ultimately comes from a mind and spirit hijacked by the outside world. So, what becomes of a nation when its government and media are hijacked by outside interests? Well, essentially the same thing. The national equivalent to possession is incorporation. The nation becomes incorporated by a foreign state. An example being the Soviet Union, incorporating various different nations and territories. Or the EU, incorporating Britain, Sweden, Germany, and so on and so forth. There are of course other names for it. Annexation, seizure, expropriation, occupation, the list goes on. Now we're talking here of the heart, which, when possessed, manifests outwardly as sociopathy. The possessed individual is a sociopath. On a national scale, a possessed or incorporated nation manifests outwardly as totalitarianism. Now that's an appropriate term, as it is the end result of an occupied mind, body and soul in their totality. The heart is where the spirit and the mind unite, or man and beast become one. The half man, half beast centaur. Or simply a person riding a beast. Sagittarius the archer, who emerges from the dark night of the soul. Or death on his pale horse. The symbolism is vast and numerous. Even a jockey riding a horse can be included. For the possessed, it would be a demon riding the horse, or a pig, whichever beast or animal you can imagine. Nonetheless, the point is it represents totality. One of the notable attributes of the heart chakra is boundaries. When applied to the incorporated nation occupied by internationalists, boundaries are a major issue, brought about by the segregation caused by mass immigration. The heart is all about knowing when and when not to cross boundaries. The two extremes, which as we know are oversensitivity versus insensitivity. What is at the core, the very heart of a nation's values, is what truly defines that nation and lets you know whether or not it has been incorporated. The principle of the heart is love of oneself and of others. A healthy nation has a love of its people, culture and heritage. The incorporated nation, however, hates itself and spits on its own people, showing no regard for culture and heritage. Meanwhile, it panders to all that is foreign and is ashamed of its own roots. This is what we see today. As nationalism is demonised as Nazism, and the traditional family is labelled homophobic and sexist, while single motherhood is placed on a pedestal of sainthood, as if it is some great achievement. Fathers are demonised and blamed for not being around, despite the fact that the corrupt family courts make it almost impossible for many of them to do so. In the UK and much of Europe, whites are demonised as racist, ignorant bigots if we dare call ourselves indigenous to these lands, even though we are. Any white person who openly loves his or her race is considered evil, ignorant and backwards, before being not so politely informed that colonialism in the past is somehow all his or her own fault, just for being born with white skin. Anytime someone criticises immigration, hordes of self-hating whites will be quick to point out that the immigrants do the jobs the Brits are too lazy to do. They generalise all the Brits in this way, but attack anyone who they deem to be generalising immigrants. So the implication is clear. To love your own people is borderline criminal, unless you are non-white. This is clearly not conducive to a healthy environment. A nation that does not love its people is as good as dead. So if we are not permitted to love our own, what does the traitor government deem to be the core values, the heart of the nation, which supposedly defines us as a people? Well, according to these sloganeering slimeballs, at our nation's heart, we are all about tolerance. You will also hear platitudes such as diversity is strength and celebrating multiculturalism and other similar sounding sentiments. Tolerance simply means to put up with it. Now, in a sane world, this would be a good thing. In the true rational sense of the word, it means thick-skinned, not being oversensitive, being able to accept other people's views without having a meltdown and flying off the handle. However, we don't live in a sane or rational world. The word tolerance was redefined by the cultural Marxist Herbert Marcuse when he formulated the idea of liberating tolerance. Liberating tolerance means only cultural Marxist views should be tolerated, while any views antithetical to cultural Marxism should not be tolerated. When you hear people say that tolerance is at the heart of British values, they mean liberating tolerance, not real tolerance. This Orwellian redefinition of words inverts their meaning.